Cel shading is actually incredibly simple. The concept is so simple that anyone can understand it. Cel shading is a stylized form of shading. Instead of painting hyper-realistic lighting, you dumb it down to just two values: light and shadow. The edges between these two values are 100% hard. There's no blending involved. But how do you use it on your characters? Where exactly do you put the shadows, and what colors should you use? My name is Daniel, and I'll show you how you can find the perfect shadow edge anytime and how you can make much better color choices. And at the end, I'll show you a special trick that can help you learn cel shading much faster. But first, we'll need to master the basics. The first problem you face is the placement of the shadow edge. Where exactly is the shadow edge? So here is every artist's best friend, a simple ball. And I know you've probably seen this 1,000 times already, but stick with me here, it's really important. As you can see, I've already painted it with a basic tone. If this ball is hit by light rays, where do you put the shadow? It depends on the position of the light source. If the light comes from the top left and you view the object directly from the side, it would look like this. The ball is receiving light in this area, but as the form turns away from the light, it receives less. And at some point, the form reverses direction and doesn't receive any light at all anymore. And that's where the shadow starts. Artists call this the Terminator. I'll be back. Nah, not that one. If the light moves toward you, you see more of the light area and the shadow shape gets smaller. The shadow always follows the form of the object. In this case, it's round, like this. If the light moves away from you, the shadow shape gets bigger and it looks the other way around. And this is basically the whole concept. Start painting the shadows at the exact point where the form turns away from the light. Now, before we get to the juicy stuff, let's take a quick look at some other forms. Here we have a cube, a cuboid and a pyramid. These angular forms are even simpler to paint with cel shading. Depending on the direction of the light source, just one or two of the side planes of the forms are in shadow. In this case, the light is coming from the top right, so it looks like this. The two remaining forms are cylinders and cones. Since these forms are rounded, they behave similarly to a ball. Depending on where the light is coming from, the Terminator changes position. So it could look like this with a light source behind the object, or it could look like this with a light source coming from the right side of the object. Now, are you still with me here? Then let's finally paint some real characters, right? To use this style of shading on your characters, you can basically think of your characters like a collection of simple forms. Right here I constructed a character out of basic simple forms. If you can shade every one of these forms, which I just showed you how to do, you can basically shade a whole character as well. If we now look at an actual finished drawing, cel shading basically works the exact same way. Start painting your shadows at the point where the form stops receiving any light. If you're painting anything that's made up of a little bit more complex forms, it's obviously more difficult than just shading simple forms. But you can make up pretty much any form from these basics. Unfortunately, I can't make you good at this by explaining it any other way, because it's based on my own experience as an artist. To get really good at this, you need to look at lots of other people's art. And also start observing light and shadow in real life. Strong sunlight is especially useful for this, because it produces very hard shadows. It's very easy to imagine this as two values, even if there's more variation in the tones. And as I said earlier, the shadows always follow the form of the object. So when painting complete characters, you have to think of the bones, the muscle, the fat and the skin. This is where your knowledge of anatomy really comes into play. So make sure to be a good little artist and practice your anatomy. Now, before we even talk about things like color, if something still looks off with this shading, it's because we haven't talked about one very important thing. The thing normal people think of first when talking about shadows. The shadows created by objects blocking the light. Cast shadows. Let's return to our beloved basic forms for a second. When these objects get hit by light, they block the light, and the light can't reach the ground. This creates cast shadows. There are elaborate ways to draw these extremely accurately, which I won't go into in this video. The interesting thing happens when objects cast shadows on other objects. because everything casts a shadow somewhere. Returning to our character painting, there are several elements that cast shadows. The nose, the head itself, the hair strands, the lips, the training suit, and even little details like the chest, the wrinkles on the face, and the sternomacular this one. Remember, shadows always follow the form of the object, and that goes for cast shadows as well. So finally, let's talk about the elephant in the room. What colors should you use when cel shading? Basically, it's no different than with any other painting. And this would actually require an in-depth class on light and color, but it's too much for this video. But here are some quick ideas for you to try out. Use high contrast. Look at this painting for example. It looks alright really, but just making the shadows darker can make it look much better. Why is that? Because the human eye craves contrast. The brighter the light and the darker the shadows, the better it will look. To a point. Of course, this suggests a strong light source, like sunlight. If you want a more dreamy look, like you were using pastel colors, it's alright, it's just another style. But generally, I suggest trying to use high contrast. How much contrast? How dark should you paint the shadows? Well, I've heard artists recommend to make the shadow color 20 to 30% darker than the light color. That's a good starting point, but in my experience you can go even further, to like 40 or 60%. But it always depends on the individual painting, of course. Next, try painting black shadows. In reality, shadows are pretty much never black. That's because there's almost always some kind of ambient light or reflected light. Nevertheless, it can be a cool stylistic choice to make the shadows 100% black. You can see this a lot in superhero comic books. A great example is the art of Mike Mignola, the creator of Hellboy. He paints completely black shadows over the initial drawing, and later it gets colorized digitally. Black shadows look so appealing because they offer the maximum amount of contrast. You can't really make the shadows any darker than that, right? The next thing you can try is to use a warm light with cool shadows. Apart from using black shadows, you can try the following. Mimic realistic lighting situations. For example, sunlight. Sunlight naturally has a warm color tint. Depending on the time of the day, it can range from yellow to orange. To use this in your cel shading, you can try to shift the light color to yellow. Not complete yellow, mind you, just a little color shift. To enhance this effect, you can couple that with cool shadows. When the sun is shining, shadows often look bluish. That's because the sky itself is also a light source. This light is called ambient light and it tints the colors of the shadows in a cool color. So shift the colors towards blue or even purple colors. Depending on how stylized you want to make your characters look, you can push this effect very far. But the essence of this is to use a warm light with cool shadows. Use a cool light with warm shadows. What we just did is to combine cool colors and warm colors. This looks so appealing because these types of colors naturally create contrast, a so-called warm-cool contrast. Actually, this works the other way around as well. Tint the light colors towards blue and tint the shadow colors towards red or orange. This is essentially the opposite, but it still creates a warm-cool contrast. It's a bit harder to pull off, but it can also look very nice. So try using a cool light with warm shadows. Now, how can we take this cel shading style to the next level? If this still looks a little too simplistic for your taste, let's spice things up a bit. When looking at this painting, I think it's not bad. But you could do so much more with it. The shadow shapes are very simple and basic. To make this visually more appealing, we can just start to paint in more little folds and bumps and stuff like that. Just give the eye more things to look at. In short, paint more details. Just this tip alone can improve the cel shading look a ton. The next tip is probably the one you've been waiting for. Cel shading essentially uses just two values. But since we just added another value, why not add even more? Adding even more light sources would make things too convoluted. Convolute. You know what I mean. But we can use more brightness variations for the main light source. Instead of painting only one tone to represent the areas where your character is hit by light, You can add more variations. Use midtones and highlights to your advantage. If you want to know how to paint midtones, just search Biscuit Art Midtones on YouTube and the video will be right there for you to watch. So adding more tones can make your cel shading look much better. But there's more you can do. Who said you can't use more than one light source? By adding another one, you can make everything look much more interesting. Try to position the second light source opposite the main light. This way the new light illuminates parts of the shadow. As for the color of the second light, feel free to try things out. You can use a colored light or even a very bright white light. That can look awesome as well. But I'm not done yet. How do you learn to pick out the light and shadow values easily? And how do you get a feeling for positioning the light and shadow shapes to make it look believable? Well, luckily there's a cool trick I want to show you. Use the threshold filter. This is a tool that's available in most painting programs. It basically converts an image into black and white. This way you can easily pick out the shadow shapes, and over time you will get a really good feeling for painting realistic shadows. Now, painting the shadows on a face can be very tricky. It's essential to get the shapes right, because otherwise it just won't look realistic at all. And if you get the shapes just a little bit wrong, the result just isn't as good as it could be. Luckily, there is a system for this. Light actually creates repeatable shadow patterns on a face, and these can make a big difference in your art. Check out the video on screen right now, where I explain everything in detail. Thanks for watching.